"I've gone too long without a man," the Apache girl said to lonely rancher John Dunsmore. Sat on the porch of his small ranch house, staring out at the endless desert stretching under the twin moons. The world around him was quiet. The only sounds the soft breeze stirring the dry grass and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. His ranch had been his home for years, but lately the silence seemed louder. After all, he had no one to share it with. No wife, no children. Just him and the land. The days were long and hot, and the nights were cold and lonely. The feeling of isolation pressed down on him, but he didn't mind. That was just life on the edge of the frontier. Still, sometimes, when the moon was full and the sky was clear, he would sit out here, hoping for something or someone to break the stillness. That night, something did. A loud, shuddering crash broke through the quiet. John stood up quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle at his side. The sound had come from the north, beyond the ridge where he usually kept an eye out for trouble. He wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not this late. Gripping the rifle, he made his way toward the ridge, each step careful as he climbed the rocky terrain. He knew the land well, but there were always dangers out here. Wild animals, and sometimes people who didn't belong. When he reached the top of the ridge, he saw it, an unmarked spacecraft, partially buried in the sand and rocks. Smoke billowed from the twisted metal, and sparks flew from broken wires. The ship looked like it had crash-landed, its lights flickering weakly in the dark. John's heart pounded in his chest as he cautiously approached. As he got closer, he saw movement. A figure crawled out from the wreckage. A woman. She was covered in dirt, her clothes torn, but her eyes burned with intensity. Her skin was dark, almost like she was from a world far different from Earth, and her long black hair flowed behind her in the wind. She didn't look like anyone from around here, and certainly not like any settlers or traders he had ever met. "Hey!" John called out, his voice steady but cautious. "Are you all right?" The woman didn't answer right away. She was slow to rise, as if injured, but she finally stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes. Her eyes met his, fierce and unyielding. She took a step toward him, her movements graceful, like someone who had seen battles and fought for survival. "I'm fine," she said, her voice low but clear. "But I need help." John lowered his rifle slightly, still not fully trusting her. "What are you doing out here? This is a long way from any settlement." The woman took a deep breath, clearly trying to gather her thoughts. "I am a Yana," she said, her gaze steady. "I come from the planet Ishkuna." John blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. "Ishkuna?" he repeated. That's not a name I've ever heard." Ayana nodded, though she looked worn out. "My people, we were forced to leave our home. The plague destroyed it. We've been on the run ever since, searching for a safe place to rebuild." John still didn't quite understand, but he could tell she wasn't lying. There was something in her eyes that spoke of hardship, of survival against all odds. He could see the exhaustion in her face, the bruises on her arms, and the way she limped slightly when she moved. He hesitated for a moment, still unsure what to do, but in the end his gut told him she wasn't a threat. "Well, I don't know about rebuilding, but I can at least get you some water and a place to rest," John said, his voice softening. "You're a long way from home, though. What's left of your ship?" "It's beyond repair," Ayana said, looking back at the wreckage with a mixture of sadness and anger. "I'll need to find parts. Maybe I can fix it, but for now, I need help. I won't last long out here alone." John looked back at his ranch, the small cabin in the distance. The decision weighed on him. His life had been simple, solitary, and he hadn't planned for anything else. But now, here she was, a stranger in a crash-landed ship, a woman from another world, asking for his help. Without saying much more, he gestured for her to follow. "All right, come on. It's not much, but it'll keep you out of the cold." The walk back to his ranch was quiet. John kept his eyes on the woman who walked beside him with a quiet dignity. She didn't seem to mind the dust or the harshness of the land. She moved like she had seen far worse, like she had been through things he couldn't even imagine. When they reached the cabin, John opened the door and motioned for Ayana to come inside. The inside of the cabin was sparse, but functional. A fire crackled softly in the corner, the only warmth in the room. Ayana looked around, taking in the rough wood walls and the simple furniture. It wasn't much, but it was home. John moved to the small kitchen area and poured some water from a metal jug into a mug. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Take a seat by the fire." Ayanna nodded gratefully and sat down on the worn couch. She sipped the water slowly, her eyes still tired, but her gaze never leaving him. John sat down across from her, feeling awkward in the silence. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't a conversation he had ever expected to have. "What happened to your people?" he asked, quietly breaking the silence. Ayanna's eyes darkened as she set the mug down. "The plague killed many. The rest of us fled. Scattered. I don't know if there are any of us left." John nodded, though he felt a deep sadness for her. The thought of losing everything, of having nowhere to go, struck a chord with him. He had always been alone, but he never had to leave behind an entire world. "I'm sorry," John said, his voice low. Ayanna met his gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I don't need pity. I just need help." John nodded again. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for now all he could do was offer what he had. He didn't know if she could fix her ship or if they could survive the dangers of the land together, but one thing was certain: his life had just changed. And it seemed like for the first time in years, he wasn't going to be alone. The next morning, John woke early, as he always did. The sky outside was still dark, and the air was cold. He went about his usual routine, feeding the animals and checking on the ranch's perimeter. The quiet of the desert settled around him once again, but it was different now. Ayanna was here, and the silence felt less empty. When he returned to the cabin, Ayanna was already awake. She was sitting by the fire, her long hair pulled back into a tight braid. The warmth from the flames seemed to give her a little strength, but there was still something about her that felt distant. She had been through so much, he could see that in her eyes. She wasn't just a traveler from another world. She was someone with a past, someone who had survived loss in ways he could never fully understand. "Morning," John said as he entered, closing the door behind him. He moved to the small table and started preparing breakfast. Ayanna didn't respond at first, but then she spoke quietly. "Thank you for letting me stay." John glanced over at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "It's the least I could do. You're not going to make it out there on your own. The desert's no place for someone who's been through what you have." Ayanna nodded but didn't say anything more. She simply watched him, studying him from across the room. John could feel her gaze, but he tried not to let it bother him. He knew that someone like her, strong, proud, and mysterious, didn't let anyone get too close easily. She was used to surviving on her own, just like him. Once breakfast was ready, they sat together, sharing a simple meal of eggs and biscuits. The silence between them felt natural, but it was different than it had been the day before. The bond that had started to form between them was still new, still fragile, but it was there. "So, what's the plan?" John asked, looking up from his plate. "How long do you think it'll take to fix your ship?" Ayanna hesitated for a moment, her hands resting on her lap. "I don't know. The damage is extensive, the systems are mostly fried, and the parts I need, they're not something I can find around here." John frowned. "We can't just leave you out there. The last thing I want is to see you stuck in the desert again." Ayanna's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "I'm used to being alone. I've had to survive like this for a long time." "Doesn't mean you have to keep doing it," John replied, his voice firm. "We'll figure something out. Maybe I can help." Ayanna gave him a long look, almost as if she were testing him. Then she nodded slowly. "Maybe." After breakfast, John went to work on his ranch, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Ayanna. He hadn't expected to get involved with anyone, especially not someone so far from his world. But there was something about her, something in her quiet strength that drew him in. She wasn't like the people he'd known in the past, and he knew that her presence here meant more than just a momentary distraction from his lonely life. He found himself wondering about her past, where she came from, what her world was like, and what had driven her to leave it behind. But he didn't ask. He knew better than to pry too much. She would tell him what she wanted him to know, and no more. Later that afternoon, Ayanna came outside. She was carrying a small toolkit, the one she had managed to salvage from the wreckage of her ship. She walked over to the old shed where John kept his tools and began sorting through them. John watched her for a moment, impressed by how focused she was. She moved like someone who had done this before, someone who knew exactly what she needed and how to get it. "Need help?" John asked, stepping closer. Ayanna glanced up, her eyes meeting his. "If you have a plasma cutter, I could use it to fix the wiring. I'll need to seal the hole, too." John scratched his chin, thinking. "I've got a few things that might work, but plasma cutters. Those are a bit more advanced than anything I've got here. I've got a few old tools, though. They might be able to help." Ayanna's gaze shifted to the tool shed behind him. "I'll take a look," she said, walking past him. John stood there for a moment, watching her work. She was focused and determined, her fingers moving with precision as she sorted through his tools. There was no hesitation, no doubt in her actions. It was clear she had done this kind of thing many times before. She was a survivor, someone who knew how to make do with what she had, no matter how little it was. After a few minutes, she found what she needed, a set of basic tools that would help her get started. She turned to John, her face a little softer now. "Thank you," she said. "You're making this easier than it needs to be." John nodded. "No problem. I'm just glad I could help." For the next few hours, they worked together on the ship. John handed her tools as she needed them, and she explained, in brief but clear terms, what she was doing. She told him about the damage to her ship, how the fuel system had exploded, and how most of the electrical systems were fried. It wasn't something she could fix in a single day, but she believed it was possible to get it up and running again if they had the right parts. As they worked, John found himself learning more about her people, her world, and the struggles she had faced. Ayanna spoke little about her home, but enough to give him a sense of the loss she had endured. Her people had been destroyed by a plague, a disease that had wiped out entire cities. Those who survived had fled, leaving behind the ruins of a once great civilization. Now, Ayanna was the last of her people, wandering the stars in search of a place to call home. John didn't know what to say to that. He couldn't even begin to understand the weight of what she had experienced. But he could tell that she didn't want pity. She wanted help, but she also wanted to remain strong, to prove that she could survive no matter the cost. The day was drawing to a close when Ayanna finally put down her tools and wiped her brow. She looked at the ship, then back at John. "I'll need more time," she said, her voice tired but resolute. "But I can make it work. Thank you for your help." John nodded. "You're welcome. Just don't hesitate to ask if you need anything else." Ayanna met his eyes, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I won't." As the sun set and the sky turned dark, John and Ayanna sat outside, watching the stars. The fire flickered beside them, casting long shadows across the desert. For the first time in a long while, John didn't feel quite so alone. The days that followed were filled with hard work and quiet moments. John and Ayanna spent most of their time on the ship, trying to repair it with the limited tools John had. Ayanna's skill and resourcefulness were clear, but John could tell that the task ahead of them was far from easy. The ship's damage was worse than she had first let on. Despite the hard work, there was something about their time together that felt comfortable. They spoke little about their pasts, but as the days passed, a bond began to form. They shared small stories, exchanged glances over simple meals, and occasionally laughed when something went wrong, like when John's old welding torch sputtered and sent a shower of sparks flying. Ayanna had been the first to laugh, and her laughter was like a burst of light in the otherwise quiet world. Each evening, as they sat together near the fire, they would share their thoughts on the stars. John had never been much for stargazing before, but Ayanna's words made him look at the night sky differently. She spoke of the stars as if they were more than just distant lights. To her, they were companions, guides that had seen her people through centuries of struggle and hardship. "There's a star," she said one night, pointing to a distant glimmer in the sky. "It's called the Heart of Ishkana. My people used to believe it guided us, leading us to safety when we needed it most." John looked up at the sky, trying to picture the distant star she spoke of. He could barely make out the shape of it, but the way she spoke made him feel the weight of her words. She wasn't just talking about a star, she was talking about hope, something that had been stripped away from her when her people were forced to leave their home. "Do you ever think you'll go back?" John asked, his voice quiet. Ayanna's expression darkened. "I don't know. Sometimes I wish I could, but I know it's gone. There's nothing left but dust and memories." John nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. He didn't want to say anything that might seem empty or hollow. He had never been in her shoes, and he knew he couldn't fully understand the weight of what she had lost. But he also knew one thing for sure. He didn't want her to feel like she had to face it alone. The next morning, as they worked on the ship again, Ayanna looked up from her work and noticed John staring at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. John turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "I was just thinking about how this place, this whole desert, looks different now. It's like ever since you showed up, I've been seeing it with new eyes." Ayanna raised an eyebrow, curious.
"New eyes?"
"Yeah," John said, wiping his hands on his worn pants. "I mean, before, this place felt so empty. But now with you here, it's like there's more to it, more life, more possibilities. Ayana stared at him for a moment, her dark eyes reflecting the faint light of the early morning. I never thought someone like you would say something like that, John chuckled. What's that supposed to mean? Someone like you, Ayana repeated, her voice soft. Someone who has everything they need right here. A good place, a stable life, a place to call home. John frowned. You think I've got everything? Ayana nodded. You don't see it, but you do. Out here, you've made a life for yourself. You've built something. I've never had that. I've always been running, always been searching. John paused, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so much time alone, focused on his work and his survival, that he had never really thought about the life he had built. It was small, yes, and it wasn't perfect, but it was his. And for the first time, he felt like it wasn't just about survival, it was about living. I never really thought about it like that, John said quietly. I guess I've been running too, just in my own way. But I didn't realize how much I'd built until you showed up. Ayana's expression softened, and she looked away, turning her attention back to the ship. There was a brief moment of silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding that neither of them needed to say out loud. As the days passed, the repairs on Ayana's ship continued slowly but steadily. John did what he could to help, even if he didn't fully understand the technical aspects of what she was doing. He trusted her, though. She knew what she was doing, and every day he could see the ship coming closer to life. One evening, as they sat around the fire again, Ayana spoke more openly than she had before. I know you're trying to help me, she said, her voice soft, but I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I've always been able to survive on my own. I've had to. John looked at her, his expression serious. I'm not helping you because I feel like I owe you something. I'm helping you because I want to. Because you're not alone anymore, Ayana. Ayana turned to him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something she didn't expect to find. But there was no hesitation in John's gaze. He wasn't just helping her because it was the right thing to do. He was helping her because he cared. She looked away then, her gaze returning to the fire. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something, but instead she remained silent. The next morning, they worked on the ship together again. As Ayana worked on the electrical systems, John took a break to check on the livestock. When he returned, he found Ayana standing next to the ship, staring up at the sky. She looked lost in thought. You okay? John asked, approaching her slowly. Ayana glanced at him, a small smile on her lips. I was just thinking. This place, it's not so bad. I think maybe I could stay here for a while. John's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to say that. He had thought she would always be looking for a way to leave, always planning to move on. But now, standing there beside him, it seemed like Ayana was beginning to see something in this place that she hadn't seen before. I'm glad to hear that, John said, his voice low. I'm glad you're here. They shared a quiet moment, the fire crackling softly between them. John didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. The weeks that followed were filled with more work and quiet moments. John and Ayana had grown accustomed to each other's company. The silence that once felt like an endless wait had now turned into something comfortable, a steady rhythm to their days. They worked side by side, day after day, and the ship began to show signs of life once again. John had started to see his ranch in a new light. It wasn't just a place of solitude anymore. It had become something more. A home, a sanctuary. And Ayana had become a part of that, not just as a guest, but as someone who had helped him see what he'd been missing all along. One morning as the sun rose over the desert, Ayana stood outside looking at the horizon. She had become quieter over the past few days, and John noticed the change. She still worked hard on the ship, but there was something else in her eyes now, an unreadable sadness, a longing for something she had never fully explained. John stepped outside, joining her. He stood beside her for a moment, just watching the sunrise. Ayana, he began, his voice soft. Are you okay? She didn't immediately respond. For a long moment, she simply stared at the sky, her eyes distant. Finally, she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said, about staying here. John didn't say anything, but he listened closely, his heart heavy with curiosity and concern. This place, Ayana continued, it's not what I expected. I thought I'd just fix the ship, leave, and keep moving. But now, I'm not so sure. John turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. You don't have to leave. Not if you don't want to. Ayana looked at him, her face softening. I know, but I've been running for so long, John, I don't know how to stop. John placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering a quiet reassurance. You don't have to run anymore. You don't have to be alone. Her eyes searched his face, almost as if she were looking for something she hadn't found before. I've been alone for so long, she said softly. I'm not sure how to change that. John took a step closer, his voice steady. It's okay to stop running. You don't have to do it all by yourself anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was filled with something deeper, something unspoken but understood. Later that day, John and Ayana worked together on the ship again. The repairs were nearly finished. Ayana had managed to fix the wiring, and the engine was starting to hum again, though it still needed a few adjustments. She was meticulous, focused on the task at hand. But John noticed the way she glanced at the ship from time to time, as though she were already thinking ahead to what would come next. He wasn't sure if she was ready to leave, but he could see the conflict in her. She had made so much progress, but there was still a part of her that held on to the need to leave, to keep moving forward. And yet, there was another part of her that seemed to be reaching for something else, a connection, a place to belong. Later that evening, after dinner, they sat outside under the stars. The night was cool, the air still, and the fire crackled softly between them. John and Ayana were both quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ayana spoke. I think it's time to decide, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I can't keep going back and forth. I have to make a choice. John turned to her, his heart racing. A choice? Ayana nodded. I can stay here with you, or I can fix the ship and leave. Keep searching for a place to call home. John's heart sank, but he didn't show it. He knew this moment would come, the moment when she would have to decide whether to stay or go. Ayana, he said softly, you don't have to leave if you don't want to. You have a place here. With me. She met his gaze, her eyes full of uncertainty. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I've been running for so long, I'm not sure how to stop. John reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I'll be here with you, no matter what you decide. For a long time, Ayana didn't speak. She simply sat there, her hand in his, her eyes on the fire. The crackling of the flames filled the silence, and John waited patiently, not pushing her, just being there. Finally, Ayana turned to him, her eyes soft but determined. I think I'm ready to stay, she said quietly. For the first time, I think I'm ready to stop running. John's heart lifted, a weight lifting from his chest. You're not alone anymore, Ayana. You don't have to run anymore. Ayana smiled, and it was the first time John had seen her truly smile since she arrived. It was a small smile, but it was full of warmth and hope, and it made John's heart swell with relief. The next morning they worked together to finish the last of the repairs on the ship. Ayana was focused, but there was a lightness in her movements, a calm that hadn't been there before. She seemed at peace with the decision she had made. As the sun began to set that evening, the ship was ready. The engine hummed quietly, and Ayana ran a final check on the systems. John stood beside her, watching her work with a sense of pride. He had never imagined that his life would lead him to this point, to this place where he wasn't alone anymore. Ayana turned to him, her eyes filled with something new. I think I can finally call this place home, she said softly. John smiled, his heart full. I'm glad you're here, Ayana. I'm glad you stayed. The two of them stood there side by side, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed.